3 degrees out, clear weather, not raining. It's a perfect day to go test a cross bike.
This bike beside me is the newest gravel offering from California-based company Poseidon. Easily the biggest talking point of this bike, without even getting into anything else, is its incredibly budget-friendly price of $600 US. For all my fellow Canadian friends, that's about 806 Canadian dollars, depending on how our economy is doing. Now that isn't to say that there hasn't been other companies that have been creating bikes at that price point. The budget-friendly option has always existed, but there's always been one very big pet peeve that I've always had with every bike at that sort of price range. And that is that the aesthetics and geometry is so painfully beginner, low-level looking that it never becomes something that anyone at any sort of slightly higher level than beginner could ever get excited about riding. I mean, just take a second to think about it. Generally, most budget options are going to come with slower steering, taller head tubes, and just overall creating this weird, not great looking bikes. Now understand, they are designed and do exist for a particular market. They're more marketed towards the entry level, the new beginner rider, who's maybe not used to that more sporty, twitchy feeling race style bike. But that's not to say that there isn't a market for people who do want a bike like that, but don't want to spend to get into a bike with that kind of geometry and those kind of looks. And in my opinion, and I think most of yours based on my unboxing video, this certainly answers that, and does it at a very, very reasonable $600.
Now the first thing I want to talk about is geometry, handling, and fit, especially as I slog through this snow and ice covered trail through all these trees and everything. Oddly enough, Poseidon doesn't really publish that much in the way of geometry. There's just like 5 key things that they put in their charts, and it's mostly just for bike fit. Wheelbase is there and bottom bracket drop is there, but other than that, they really give you no indication on what you're getting into handling wise. Gives you a slight idea of what you're going to get fit-wise, which is fine. But of course, it is kind of nice to have those numbers, like a head tube angle and fork rake, just to kind of get an idea of how the bike is going to steer and how it's going to handle. I can understand why it's maybe not published, because probably a lot of people at this price point wouldn't really know what they're looking at anyway, but it'd just be kind of cool to read it, just to compare to what I'm feeling. And currently what I can say handling-wise is I feel very much at home. Nothing about the steering or the wheelbase or the way the bike acts at all feels foreign in any way. I honestly think I could probably jump on this with a decent set of tires and be competitive at a cross race. So even though I don't have the published geometry numbers, the handling does feel familiar to my Tri-Cross and my Crux. 2 bikes that I'm really quite fond of. And speaking of racing and bike fit and geometry, I think it's worth mentioning that you can really achieve a low and long race fit if that is kind of the way you want to ride, which I do. So I can really appreciate that in such a budget-friendly bike. And I mean, of course, for all of you who might have back issues or just aren't ready for such a low and long position, there is tons of steer tube left. The bike does come with the stem up nice and high. You can flip it up. You can get into that comfortable upright position. It's just nice to know that they didn't do that all with head tube like, you know, other bikes that are designed to be budget friendly and very comfortable for new early on riders who just don't have that flexibility yet. With this, you can work towards it. You don't have to go buy a new race frame. You can just lower the stem on this. Performance-wise, the frame and fork act just about as you would expect from most hydroform aluminum frames. There's nothing real noticeable in the way of flex. Tires don't rub. The front end feels stiff, planted, don't have to worry about it. Descending, all kinds of confidence. In fact, as I've said before, it felt familiar. I felt at home on it. In no way is this lacking in any sort of performance. It's just what you would expect from an alloy frame. Now, as a cross race bike, the geometry is completely adequate. However, this oddly shaped top tube does sort of lead to a bit of a point, and that's a little bit annoying for shouldering a bike when you're going upstairs. Although I do appreciate the less than compact shape that this front triangle is, giving you lots of space to be able to actually get your arm in through there. Now, as a road bike, it's totally adequate, just like any other cross bike or gravel bike is. But if you were in the market for this as a road bike, you know, there are better options out there. Poseidon even has some. I've been playing with it on bumpy ice and snow, and it's been perfect for that kind of stuff. Once dirt starts showing up again, well, it'll be very similar, just it won't be as slippery. Now, the brakes. The brakes work totally fine, as you would sort of expect from any mechanical disc brake. It's just sort of bizarre that they didn't come with any sort of barrel adjuster in line or on the brake itself to do any sort of on-the-fly adjustments. When it comes to wheels, I'm not even really sure what they are because they're not even listed on the website as to what they are, but it is fairly obvious that they're just a low-end wheel, which is totally forgivable because even all the biggest companies do that on pretty well all of their bikes except for their flagships. These wheels did kind of go out of true within the first ride, but I also didn't give them any sort of servicing before I went out. I put them into the bike, started riding it. You could hear the spokes pinging and moving around. Normally what you would do is pull the tire off, put them in a truing stand, and give them a bit of a bedding in. But literally any machine built wheel coming out of a box without any sort of servicing pretty well will do that. Now, I know all of you were saying that these small block 8s were gonna suck and that they're the worst ever, but I haven't actually had a whole lot of issues with them. Now, last but certainly not least, shifting. And it pains me to say this because I'm such a SRAM fanboy, but the shifting on this is really, really good. Annoyingly good. I wish it was worse. So then I could say, hey, why don't you just upgrade it to a SRAM drivetrain? But I would see no reason to do that. The front derailleur shifts perfect, even on those steel stamped chain rings. The rear derailleur shifts beautifully. It's very smooth, so it doesn't take any abnormal strength or effort to get the shift lever to move. Overall, I'm very impressed with the Claris 8-speed group set. But don't tell anyone I told you that.
Now, admittedly, I do really love this thing almost purely on aesthetics. The fact that it has a geometry and a fit very similar and familiar to the bikes that I already ride is just this unbelievably great bonus. But I know what you're thinking, and yes, at this price point, there has to be something that is a chink in the armor. There's got to be something that's given up to get what we got. And after 2 days of riding around in snow, rainy, gritty weather, I've sort of found them. One spot where I'm thinking there's probably some cost cutting is in the paint finish. As you can see, just after 2 days of riding, the paint has already worn away from where the cable touches the bike. I'm not gonna go as far as to say that that's upsetting. I don't think it is, especially for the price. And I mean, really, you could just kind of consider that an invite to give this any paint job that you could possibly want. While the brakes do work pretty decent, I can't help but feel pretty annoyed that there isn't some sort of barrel adjuster involved somewhere. I suspect eventually, especially in cross conditions, that the angle of this will introduce water, grit, grime into the rear brake cable, which means that it will start to lose some of its modulation. It won't work that great and you'll have a sticky cable at some point. Steel chain rings, steel cassette, steel chain without any sort of protection on it did end up leading to some rusting. not really a big deal and pretty well expected for the level of drivetrain that's on there. So the wheels came mildly out of true, but that, like I said before, is just to be expected. I really should have thrown them in the truing stand before going out anywhere to keep it from happening at all. Just like what every decent bike shop should do. Now, would I go as far as to say that any of those little problems are deal breakers? Absolutely not. For $600, you're getting into a bike that will follow you through just about every level of upgrading you want to do before you want to get absolutely ridiculous with it. For more info, I've linked to the Poseidon website below. There is a small commission if you do decide to buy one that I get, so thanks if you do. And be sure to ask a ton of questions in the comments below. Lewis, who works at Poseidon and sent me this bike, will read just about every comment under this video, and if you have any questions, likely he'll answer them because he did on the last one. So any questions, leave them below. And expect more from this bike because I'm going to try and put some mountain bike tires on it probably this week.